Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 306, cover dated November 1993. So no cover caption here, but we have Warren Worthington, that is Archangel, facing off against an old friend, a now bitter foe, and it is Cameron Hodge in this monstrous techno-organic hulking form. We'll learn subsequently that he is an agent of a new threat to the X-Men, that is the Phalanx. So tremendous cover here by John Romita Jr., really filling up the space with the figures. And I love the foreshortening on Archangel's bent forearm here as he's about to smash into Cameron's drooling maw. So let's open this one up to the splash page. And here we have old classmates, current Gold Team teammates, Warren and Jean Grey enjoying a flight, as it turns out, to Warren's house in the Colorado mountains. And they're enjoying themselves here. And the editorial footnote tells us that the action takes place between Uncanny X-Men 304, The Return of Magneto, and X-Men 25, when Professor X takes out Magneto, mind wipes him. So the title of the story is Mortal Coils, and the creative team is Scott Lobdell, writer, John Romita Jr., penciler, Dan Green, inker, Chris Eliopoulos, letterer, Steve Buccellato, colorist. So interesting here, the kind of dialogue between Archangel and Jean. This is something that John Romita Jr. enjoyed doing at this time. And I was thinking about it before making the video that his first run on the X-Men, he was constrained very much in terms of what he could do. There was a tight editorial rein on him, particularly via Jim Shooter, and he was only able to do breakdowns. He was only allowed to do breakdowns, and Dan Green was finishing his art. But here we see John Romita Jr. credited as a full penciler, and he's taking advantage of the more creatively open Tom DeFalco era, and doing a lot of experimentation with layouts. So here we have like the almost full wingspan here of Warren as he's flying towards his Rocky Mountain home. And we get some banter between Warren and Jean, and how he is kind of half flirting with her, asking her for a kiss if they're going to die as they drop into free fall. And she says to him, if I kissed every guy every time I almost died, my lips would have fallen off years ago. So then they arrive at his home in the Rockies, and she remembers the night of the school prom. Scott was busy learning how to take Cerebro apart and put it back together. What was the term you used of her? I was anatomically correct. So going back to the original X-Men, all the boys pretty much, except for Iceman, had a crush on Jean Grey. In particular, Warren was the rival for Scott's affections. And here he is thinking back to those times many years ago. Kids say the darndest things. And she replies, smiling, sure, it was a sexist, objectifying thing to say, but you did get points for sincerity. This is an interesting character moment where Warren looks away and says, he's an idiot, you know. Scott, if I was the guy you were in love with, I'd have asked you to marry me the day we graduated, Xavier's. And if you were the guy I was in love with, says Jean, I would have said yes. Now, their moment of friendly conversation is about to be unexpectedly and shockingly interrupted by this figure in silhouette. And Warren is thinking back to the fact that it is the first anniversary of Candy. That's Candy Southern, his girlfriend from way before X Factor, from back in the X-Men days. He calls her here the only woman who ever loved me, to some mutant-hating madman who was once my best friend, and that's Cameron Hodge. And what he's referencing there is Cameron Hodge killing Candy back in X Factor number 34. So as they talk there and Jean comforts Warren, there is someone coming through the sliding door of the house, and it is none other than apparently Candy herself. This is a nice page, nicely laid out and drawn by Romita Jr. and Dan Green. And then of course the scene switches. So we go to Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters in Westchester County, the Danger Room specifically, and Beast is about to run a scenario that Professor X has requested. So this is all in the run-up to Professor X taking the strike team to Avalon to take on Magneto, and he's chosen to spar with in a zero-gravity environment, which is simulated by the Shi'ar technology that runs the Danger Room, Magneto's own son, Pietro. So this is going to be both physical and a kind of psychological combat. So let's see how it goes. So I really like this use of the double page half spread here by John Romita Jr. This is what he's renowned for. Just a huge kinetic punch here, knocking Professor X in the jaw. And Hank here in the control room with his humorous commentary. My teeth are rattling all the way up here in the control booth. So Professor X in this zero gravity environment has some degree of kind of equalization between him and Pietro. So Pietro isn't able to move in his super fast way, as is his usual power. And Professor X himself is using cunning to tackle Pietro in this environment. So he says here with a look of determination on his face, "First blood, it appears, goes to you, Quicksilver. Let's see if I possess the necessary means to return the favor." So Bishop arrives into the control booth and he says to Beast here, "It would seem the professor is enjoying this." "Yes, Bishop, so it does, and I'm not enjoying that at all." So Professor X, under Lobdell, undergoing something of a character development arc, getting a little darker, prepared to use less than angelic means to get his way and bring about his dream of peaceful coexistence between humans and mutants. So we have this little bit of psychological dialogue between Quicksilver and Professor X here, where Quicksilver is surprised that Professor's playing dirty, throwing the space rock in his face. And he says to him, "You surprised me, Professor. I was expecting a modicum of decency, of fair play." And the Professor says to him, Do you think your father will play fair, Pietro, when he begins his plans for world dominance in earnest? Do you believe he will extend the same courtesy to us, to me, that I extended to him by merely hurling him from Earth instead of defeating Magneto once and for all?" That's a reference to Uncanny 304. And Pietro, what he says here is interesting. "You are not my father, sir, nor do you have to become him in order to defeat him." But Professor X says in reply, "Years ago, he tried my way. Maybe it is time I met him on his own ground." And that was something that Magneto said to Professor X in Uncanny X-Men 304, that he, Magneto, had tried Professor X's way for some time, had walked his path as headmaster of the New Mutants, and he invited Charles to walk his path in return. And so this is the Professor responding to that. So the simulation is over. Beast said earlier the Danger Room could only sustain a zero gravity environment for about 2 minutes. So it's over, it's kind of stalemate, and Quicksilver extends a hand of assistance to the Professor. He says, "Allow me to give you a hand, sir, or would you rather I bring the chair to you?" And Professor X says, "To be bluntly honest, I would rather you concern yourself with other matters entirely, Pietro." And he looks at him here, "I can manage on my own." So a grim determination on Professor X's face, and Pietro, as he walks away, says, "I used to believe the same thing about myself, Charles, and I was wrong." So interesting little dialogue between them in terms of the change in Professor X's character and how he is taking on a bit of Magneto into his new outlook and new perspective on life. And then we switch back to Colorado and Warren's home in the Rockies. And we have skepticism, naturally enough, on his part about Candy, and how could it be that she's alive? So he's suspicious also of the characters, these wreathing skin characters that were encountered by Iceman, Rogue and Bishop in the previous issue, and that they've obviously reported back to the rest of the X-Men on. And Candy says that Candy might be one of those, but she says, you have to believe me. If there was anything I could do to protect you from this, from having to see me again, having to deal with my presence in your life, I would have done it. I only came here because I didn't know where else to turn. So Jean confirms that Candy believes she is who she says she is. It's all there, her memories and her undying love for you. So Archangel accepts it finally and hugs a weeping Candy. And then we switch to New York, and this is very interesting. In preparing to make the video and in rereading the issue, I'd completely forgotten about this 2-pager, where in the West Village, Aurora is going to a restaurant. This one, it seems, Sirocco's. And who's there to meet her in the booth except for Forge? And he calls their meeting a date. And he says, you're probably confused. Since the last time we spent more than 5 minutes alone together, it was because we were trapped in another dimension. A reference back to Fall of the Mutants and Uncanny X-Men issue 226 and 27. And here, of course, the waiter, or the maitre d', who overhears it, thinks that Forge is joking, and he's got the champagne ready for Aurora and a compliment too. So what is going on? What's he called her for? What is the nature of this date? She wants to do some shop talk. I like this 9-panel grid layout here for the storytelling. Romita Jr. keeping it interesting with the body language and the acting of the characters in on this page. Nicely done. So Forge wants to apologize. He says, I don't know if apologize is the right word. I just wanted you to know I regret what happened that night. I said a lot of hurtful things. He's referring back to Uncanny X-Men 290, where he took back his proposal of marriage to Storm, even as she had arrived to say yes to him. And I had no right to. I was angry, hurt, and Aurora interrupts him. That is very kind of you, Forge, but everything you said was true. I was just not prepared to hear it at the time. So then he asks her for a dance, even a tarantula, and there's no music playing, but Forge, the old romantic, says, all you have to do is listen with your heart. Nice little 2-page scene between these two former lovers, and of course the question for readers would be, shall they be lovers again? And then we switch back to the Rockies, and Jean goes into Candy's mind, taking Warren in with her, and they find themselves back in the events of X Factor number 34, with Cameron Hodge looming over Candy. And this was the moment that she died, and we have memories there of Warren remembering back how he was too late to prevent his former best friend from killing Candy, but he sees it from her perspective, her mind's eye, and then he sees something he never knew before, which was that in the last instant of her life, Candy looked towards him. Until this moment, he'd always believed she died in relative peace, enveloped in the catatonic cocoon, which occasionally precedes death. But now he realizes she was aware that she knew he could not save her, that the best he could do was to avenge her, and you can see the horror on his face. And this is nicely illustrated by Romita Jr. And then this is another one where we have to turn the page to the horizontal, and Warren is really deeply upset. She believed in me, Jean, and in the end I failed her. But Jean says, no, you didn't. Not then, not now, because it didn't end there. Weeks, months later, no way of knowing, her awareness, if not her life, began again. Who were they, Jean? Why can't you make out their faces? And then we get little snatches of the dialogue of these characters who revived or whatever it is they did with Candy, different from the prototypes. Own work, intimately familiar with. Incredible, never met her, resemblance. Trust me, identical. So we get these snippets of dialogue from them. First of many, even Xavier won't have to awaken from the dream. And then what happens is there's a psychic time bomb that goes off to prevent Jean and Warren from learning anything more from Candy's psyche regarding why she's back from the dead. And then this horrific figure makes its way invades his home and speaks. Bravo, Ms. Grey, mucho bravo. If I had hands, I'd be tempted to applaud. In fact, if you would just give me a moment, I'd be more than willing to accommodate you in that regard, just as you helped me by taking Ms. Southern into La Casa, the Worthington. So the psi signature is, he doesn't need any declaration of the psi signature. He recognizes the voice, no matter what he looks like, no matter what he's become. Who is it? It's Cameron Hodge. So Cameron Hodge, last seen in X Factor 62, that was part 9 of the Extinction Agenda crossover, and he was buried by Richter. His head was buried by Richter under the citadel of the Genoshan capital. So that would have seemed to have been the end of him, but long-term readers might remember that Cameron Hodge made a deal with the demon Nastir before the events of Inferno to be immortal. So in some respect, this is confirmation that Nastir was true to his word. And here is Hodge, still alive, still back, looking to exterminate all mutants. So he explains here that he has been reconstructed from almost nothing, the remains of his head, and has agreed to vanguard a closet movement intent on wiping mutants at last from the face of the planet. So Archangel here enraged, and he tells Hodge not to call him Warren, not to address him as Warren. That was my name when we were friends, before you had my original wings amputated, before you sold your body and soul to purge the world of what you perceived was a threat to humanity. So a face-off coming up here. Great art again by John Romita Jr. Just the design here, this techno-organic hulking monstrosity. Frightening design. And then turn the page to the horizontal, and we have Archangel ripping his wings into and through the torso of Hodge. So Hodge's cell functions terminating there. But then what he's able to do is he's able to draw on any materials around him to rebuild himself. And what's happening too is he's got some kind of link to Candy. And he explains, would you believe he's stripping her for spare parts? See, Ms. Southern and I are on the same warranty, simpatico, if you will. Look at that evil, maniacal grin on his face. And so this is a horrific moment when Candy here declares that she won't be used again, and she starts ripping herself apart, ripping into her techno-organic chest and pulling her guts out, so to speak. Wasn't enough you killed me? She asks him. You had to bring me back. You had to turn me into this. And he says here, I'm not the one who fell in love with Jean trash like Warren Worthington, was I? So Jean is there to help Candy, using her mental powers to shut down Candy's nerve endings to spare the tremendous amount of pain she's feeling. And this guy, Hodge, is drawing on non-organic fodder for the moment. And so he's rather like, in this regard, something like a version of Master Mold and or the Fury back from Alan Moore and Alan Davis's run on Captain Britain. He's like unstoppable, unkillable in this regard, so it seems. But we're coming to the end of the story, 2 pages left. This is a great page by John Romita Jr. and Dan Green. And the art here, this techno-organic, bulging, bursting horror, reminds me of the art by Frank Miller in the final couple of chapters of Ronin, in particular the final chapter. Very reminiscent of Ronin. And John Romita Jr. on record as a big admirer of Frank Miller. So definitely seeing that here on this page. But just look at what's happening here as Cameron Hodge is bulking up. And what Candy's doing, the desecration of her mainframe, as he puts it, is overriding his failed safes. So this is mutually assured destruction, so to speak. But look at Candy like ripping her lips off her face. She says she's been dead. This just makes it worth it. And then the whole thing goes up in an explosion. You can see here that Archangel is shielding Jean and himself with his wings. And all the bits of Candy and Hodge go everywhere in Warren's home. So what an ending. And she's still half alive. And she explains to Archangel, the look, Warren, when I died, wasn't disappointed, not angry at you, grateful, in love forever. And Warren, with the tears pouring from his eyes, says, and ever. So what an anniversary of her death, coming back from the dead, dying again, but dying heroically this time and taking out Cameron Hodge, her killer, from X Factor 34. So interesting, Lobdell mining the continuity for a story like this that advances the developing Phalanx plot, but also gives more closure, a stronger emotional closure to an event from Archangel's past, the death of his long-term love, Candy Southern. And there's Jean to comfort him. But she says to him, it's over, Warren. And he asks her, is it? He said there were others, that's Hodge, that they could pose as people we knew or as complete strangers. So tell me again, Jean, tell me it's over. So threats seeded for the future. I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on Uncanny X-Men 306. If you did, please like the video in YouTube, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.